a lot to talk about with these four incredible artists. Dorothea, shall I start with you?
My name is Dorothea Rockburn, and on October the 18th, I'll be 90. I mention that because I've seen the way in which women have been treated, since I was a child. In 1932, I was born, and the change is gigantic. And I'll try to talk a little bit about that. As everybody knows, I'm an artist, and I was born in Montreal, and I went to school at Black Mountain College. Came to New York in '54.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Hawkins. I am a painter for a while, but I'm interested in a lot of different things, and I recently, in 2019, I got a PhD, and it was fun.
Did you say it was fun? More power to you.
American Studies.
Jane Kaplowitz. I'm 73, out and proud. I've been an artist for a long time. I actually started at Pratt Institute as a fashion major, and I couldn't cope with it. So I looked at the art students longingly and thought, do you think I could do this? And the rest is, the rest of my life.
I just want to note that you looked at the fashion students and said, that looks really difficult, and then went to art?
No, not difficult, lame. I shouldn't say that.
Sorry to anyone who's in fashion here.
It was the wrong tribe. It was the wrong tribe. It was a different tribe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny Snider, and I have a little bit more to say, but this is an answer to the first two questions.
Okay, should I go ahead and say what the first two questions are?
I'm 78 years old, and no, you don't.
Okay.
And until 2015, I lived most of my life in New York City. I grew up in Sunnyside, Queens, a few blocks away from Sylvia Plymouth Mangold, and went to the same elementary schools, public elementary schools, as all the Plymouth siblings, and Ivy's father and mother, and the great actress Judy Holliday. My father, Silas Snider, grew up in Long Island City and went to PS1. He claimed that James Cagney, the great dancer and film star, was the gym assistant when he was a student there. I don't know if that is true. My mother, Clara Fox Snider, was a Lucy Stoner, which means that she kept her maiden name, Clara Fox, for the first year or so of her marriage. My father's cousin was the painter Pearl Fine. I'm almost finished. This is just to drop all the names right now, and then I'll be quiet. My father's cousin was Pearl Fine, who was one of the 10th Street abstract expressionists who studied with Hans Hofmann. And my sister, Amy Snider, was the mother of Ivy Shapiro. That's it.
Well, it answers the question, Ivy, because. So the next question is actually, before we get into how everyone got into painting, since you've brought up Ivy, the curator of this exhibition, this glorious exhibition, I was hoping that all of you could share a little bit about your relationship with the curator, as well as sort of your perspective on the origins of this show. But you can't go because you just went. So anyone can start. Actually, Cynthia, I'll start with you, because I'm looking at you right now.
Well, for me, it's an interesting question because in reality, I think that it's Ivy's relationship with someone who I just met recently in the past year, Julia Trotta, is the reason I'm in this exhibition. Some people asked, we did a Zoom meeting, another group, and we talked about how we came together, talked about the exhibition, but people ask me, did I know these people at the time? And I knew of them, I knew their work, but I did not know them. Because you remember that in the 70s was very much segregated. And the galleries weren't interested in what not just women were doing, but also artists of color. So to be in this show with the people I did know at the time, who I met, Betty Blayton, Dinga McCannon, Emma Amos. I loved Vivian Brown, a lovely person, and I didn't know Jarmila. I just found out about her last year when I was compiling a list of abstract artists, painters in particular, from the first generation. So times have changed. People have definitely opened, the door, and that's how I got here.
Thank you so much. Who would like to go next? Okay, great.
I was a good friend of Ellen Phelan's, and I was a good friend
Do
of
we
Ellen
have any mic
Phelan's.
stands?
She lived on
No?
Lafayette,
Okay.
and I lived on Crosby and Grand, still live there. And that's when I met little Ivy.
And how little was Ivy?
What, about 5 years old? Something like that, 5, 6, something in there. And because she was always at Ellen and Joel's. And it was an interesting time, I thought, because the art world was changing, and it was overcoming other things that had happened in the art world, other movements, and everything was up for grabs. It seemed like for me, and I wanted to mention Elizabeth Murray. She was a good friend of mine. I wanted to tell a story which sort of illustrates that time. There were lots of articles, Don Judd, but a lot of other people, on how painting was dead. They were all written by sculptors, by the way. and article after article in the art magazines, painting is dead, painting is dead. And somebody said we were at a party or dinner or something, somebody said to Elizabeth, "How do you feel about that?" She said, fuck them all, I'm going to paint." That was Elizabeth.
And here we are in this magnificent painting show.
Excuse me?
I said, here we are in this magnificent painting show just a couple years later.
I wanted to congratulate you. I haven't talked to you about this, but this is a fabulous show. Fabulous. The best woman's show I've ever seen, ever.
Well, Jane, I guess it's down to you.
I know Ivy through her family. I know Joel. I know Ellen. Ellen and I were friends for a long time, and same with Elizabeth. You know, we traveled in similar circles. I was slightly younger, but I remember Dorothea was very historic in my crowd. You worked for...
Do you remember when I visited you and you rented a house in Long Island?
Yes.
On one of those islands? I can't remember.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
full of mosquitoes.
Yeah, and we were, my husband and I were sort of mortified because it was such a jump. It was like, oh, Dorothea's coming. Yes, I totally remember that. And also, we knew, like, the girls that and the women that I hung out with, like, knew that you worked for Rauschenberg at a time, and we were all, holy shit. And we thought, like, you were this emblematic woman that was, like, moving on, you know, working with Rauschen, doing all these things. It was very impressive.
You know, I knew Bob a long time. I met him when I was 18 at Black Mountain College. Bob and Cy Twombly were my best friends. So it just continued into a job for some weird reason.
Well, I actually, you know, I was going to ask, I'm still going to ask it, and then we'll go to this question about teaching and opportunity at the time when all of you are coming up. But before I go there, I know this is sort of a cheesy question, but as an art historian, I always like to hear it. What is the origin story for each of you for painting and the persistence in painting throughout your lives? Anyone can start. Poor Cynthia, we keep putting her on the spot. Well, Cynthia, it's back to you now.
All right, so I think there was somewhere, well, people like to start earlier, right? But yeah, I tried to be other things. I wanted to be a scientist. I was going to be a nurse. I would watch a movie, and I go, oh my gosh, I got to help the soldiers. And, you know, I want to be Bob Brown. You know, I want to make rockets. But I wasn't very good at math, although I like math a lot. So, but there was somewhere, I was going to be a history major, and then I went through the art department building one night and thought, yeah, I'm going to do this. And at the time, you had to, like, sort of pass, you know, be approved by the faculty to be an art major. And so I worked and worked and worked. I presented my stuff to the faculty, the committee, and they said to me, well, what are you going to do if we don't let you major in painting? Well, I was like, what? I'll do it anyway, you know? And so, yeah, they said I could be an art major. But when I look at my work since '72, I think I can't remember doing any homework for school. I don't remember. I remember being in drawing class and things like that, but all I really remember is what I was doing, which is like the painting in there is from like, I don't know, what, 74 or 5. And before that, there were a slew of pastels that preceded them. There were these drawings that evolved into the mark making that precede this, painting there, and it keeps going. So there's this incredible continuity since 1972. And I just loved it. I have a sort of diary from 1981 to 1982 that's about some work I did that I no longer have, but I have photos of them. And I read in there as I'm proofing this that I'm telling myself, writing down that I love this so much that it hurts, you know? I found a photograph of me kissing my own painting. Okay? So I've always been like 100% committed to it. And the only thing that I think really concerned me early on was creating some kind of exhibition history. Because, you can't, if you don't get that, you have to have that. That's what validates. Would validate me at the time during that period. It's like being in shows. So I never even thought about money. And I would tell anybody, you can't think about money, no matter what you do. I don't care if you're writing or knitting or painting, the money, you can't think about it because it makes you do things you wouldn't do. So that's me.
Very, very true. And I just want a quick follow-up to that question. Prior to school, did you consider yourself a maker at all, or was it something that was a compulsion that was sparked while in school?
Well, I was very interested in art history. I used to take out Gardner's History of Art book from the library constantly, every period. But I only ever read the first section. I only got through, the Ice Age.
The ancients. The ancients.
Of Willendorf. I was just over and over again. So I do have this incredible fascination for ancient, objects and, sort of hieroglyphs, which you can see in there and in that painting. So, so I would do this over and over. So, for years. But then, I would make a little watercolor. I'd copy a photograph, and I gave it to my friend who had a cold. I would once in a while go, oh, what does it look like for a fence to go around a tree? Sort of a perspective, the perspective of that. How would you draw that? I mean, this is the kind of things I did. I had paint by numbers. I hated it. I hated it. And I remember John Nagy on TV, and that was all right. But I'm not good at I don't like to follow rules. I don't like tiny, staying within the lines. That's just, and even a coloring book. It's like I resented having to, conform to the image that was presented. So this is perfect, right? I mean, my last figurative painting was a painting of gymnasts in gym equipment, balance beam, uneven parallel bars. There were a couple of female figures. And I worked on it a long time, and when I was done, I thought, this is not about the figure at all. It's about direction, about movement. So that was the last one I did. And I still have it. I haven't looked at it in years, but I found it in the attic, and that was the end. So then I used the gym equipment as my starting off point. I went to the gym at the college, and I just drew these things over and over and over and over and over, pastel, until they became something else. And that was the beginning of, I would even say, my mature work, right? Because I understood the evolution of what is known to what is not known, to the lived organic thing to something that is, geometric. And somewhere along the line, the most impressive thing I think I ever noticed was Mondrian's tree drawings, right? It was like, what? Yes. That was the most impressive thing that I've ever seen. And after that, I was really into Hans Hofmann, push-pull, color, whatever. I have his little book. And
thank you so much. No, not at all. I mean, it's fascinating to hear this kind of trajectory from figurative and beyond, and sort of how you develop. And I think the same question for the three of you, sort of what was foundational as your entry point into painting? You want to go? Sure.
I felt at the time when I left graduate school and moved to New York, I felt like you needed to have a dialogue with the work that was being made at the time. And there was a lot of process art, and as Dorothea said, nobody was painting. It was, I felt like, you better not be painting, girl. And I looked at, men like Andre and Judd and all of those people, and I felt like I had to do something that was within my boundaries of my own aesthetics, but had some kind of dialogue with the work that I actually was responding to, which was minimalism, conceptualism, and process art. And so, I did those things. Thank you. Goodbye.
Would you like to go ahead?
I think I'll pass. I'll pass.
You'll pass on this one? Okay. Dorothea?
Well, I had a more formal background. I came from Montreal, of course, and a teacher. I drew a nasty picture of a teacher when I was 9 years old, and she was smart. She took it away. She said, "Who did this?" And I thought, "Oh, goddamn, here." It was a strict school. So I put my hand up, and she said, "You stay after school." And I thought, and then she said, "You can really draw." She said, "Do you think your parents would let me take you to art school on Saturday?" So I was like 9 or 10, so every Saturday I went to École de Beaux-Arts de Montréal. And I had a lot of formal training. We ground our own pigments, and I made button fresco, and there was a lot of the formal things. So to move it along a bit, and I went to the Montreal Museum School for a while too. And when I went to Black Mountain College, everybody knew what to paint, but they didn't know how to paint. And I was 18. I knew how to paint backwards and forwards, but I didn't know what to paint. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I had to go through a lot of post-student work, and I did my share of de Koonings, as everybody did at that time. and I think Chuck Close said he'd done more de Koonings than de Kooning. But eventually, the other thing that happened to me at Black Mountain, which was very important, was that I didn't like the painting classes. I went to other classes, and some of which had to do with art. There was a sound like movement class that was just a takeoff on the Schlemmer from the Bauhaus. And, but more or less I was kind of lost. I was taking a lot of academic courses. And then one day I wandered into the math class. And I never had any mathematics because I went to a girls' school. They didn't teach girls mathematics. And the teacher was a German Jew who fled Germany and just escaped the Nazis. He'd been imprisoned after Kristallnacht, and he and his wife were amazing. And he made mathematics seem creative. And you weren't studying a still life, you were studying the universe. And boy, did I ever go for it. So he loaned me a bunch of books. He asked me to take his class. I said, "I'm not prepared, I can't do it." And he said, "Well, I'll teach you mathematics from nature." And he took me on these walks and explained Fibonacci progressions and all that in nature. And he gave me a lot of books, and I was intrigued, and I worked like hell. And when I came to New York, I took those books with me, and I continued to work on them. And P.S., about 10 years ago, I got a doctorate in mathematics from Bowdoin College. But
That's incredible.
My work have always been based on math.
That's incredible. I don't see, I have two questions, and I don't know which direction we should go in. We can either go with, they're both meaty. one was about the importance of teaching, but I think I'll come back to that because you just said something, Dorothea, that struck me about how you weren't taught mathematics. And, one of the things we talked about in our previous secret conversation that you're now all hearing about, you had mentioned the importance of acknowledging the types of social structures and messaging that was going on either during your childhoods or even during the 70s, even during a period that was considered to be the feminist revolution or the second wave of the feminist revolution, the types of messaging that were served to utterly diminish women artists, but we rarely actually talk about that in a concrete way. We sort of speak about it in this nebulous way, and so I'm wondering if any of you would like to speak on that a little bit.
I'd like to speak on that because, because of my age, coming from the year one, women were treated so badly. And of course, I was born into the Depression, and all women were housewives. Nobody worked. Nobody could get a job. They wouldn't hire women because it was considered taking a job away from a man who was supporting his family. And then, bingo, because Canada was English, they went into war in 1939. I mean, my life totally changed. I mean, we had people that worked in the house, and I ate things like beef bourguignon and coq au vin and all that stuff every night. Suddenly, it was make your own meals. Everybody, including my mother, went and worked in a factory, in a war factory, and everybody stopped wearing dresses. They were wearing coveralls, and they were wearing not high heels. They were wearing work shoes. Yeah. And so and they talked for the first time. I never heard women talk when I was growing up. And suddenly with the war, everybody talked and had opinions, and it was really interesting, to see this. And by the way, when I was going through all this girly stuff with friends and family, I thought to myself, I remember I was about 10 years old, and I said, there are men, women, and me. Because I'm a woman, but I'm not like them. So they're watching that whole evolvement, and then after the war was over, which for Canada was 45, suddenly there was something called the new look. Women were back in dresses. The skirts were quite long. They were wearing high heels, and in the kitchen. Yeah.
I'm wearing these high heels because I'm sitting here, and I have about 15 more minutes in them.
No, I'm talking about people who really wore high heels everywhere, and you simply can't work in them.
So would you consider it to be sort of like a retraction almost, or a recalibration to an extreme version of what was there before?
Yes.
And so for the rest of you, I'm wondering if you can also comment on some of what was happening during these formative years. Go ahead.
Well,
Jenny,
I think this is pertinent. In 1995, Elizabeth Murray put together a show at the Museum of Modern Art called Artist's Choice. She was the first woman asked to organize a show for them from their collection. Kurt Varnado was the curator at that time. And interestingly enough, I have a list here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 people in this show were in that show that Elizabeth put together. Dorothea, Nancy, and Nancy Graves was in it, yes. Louise Fishman, Jennifer, me, and I don't know if anyone else here, but it seems to me that this show is the result of that show. Because what Elizabeth did was she looked at the collection, what was in the closet of the Museum of Modern Art. The women's work that had never been shown or rarely been shown and had never been highlighted. There were women in that show I had never heard of before. And it seems to me that this show is, and this audience really, and younger artists now, younger women now, are all the beneficiaries of what started in the 70s with our generation of women who started talking and supporting each other's work. Even though, as Cynthia so rightly said, it was a very segregated culture at that time, the art world. But at least in terms of male and female, we weren't interested in what they were talking about anymore. We just enjoyed each other's company and support. And it has, in fact, despite the larger politics, and we can get into that later, we did change the world. That's
Yeah.
all.
Gria?
Dayton, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. It was understood when I was coming up that you weren't going to sell your work. That was just like, you had to have a side hustle. Teaching, working for other artists, friends, gallery girls, tons of all my friends, we'd like meet sometimes for lunch, all these like girls that worked on I keep saying girls, women that worked on, well, thank you, that worked on West Broadway, Yacht Reitman, we'd all like have these jobs, and it was just understood that you'd paint it when you got home. You'd paint when you got home, and you'd paint on the weekends, and you'd go to Finelli's or Spring Street Bar, and there'd be a party, and you'd make dinner out of that. And that was the life, and it was really great. It was fantastic. I thought it was like, this is how I want to live for the rest of my life, except it would be nice to be in a gallery and sell something, but that seems so like, why don't you wish for like, just that seems so,
So sort of like far-fetched at that time.
Way out of my reach, eventually it happened, but initially it was all the women I knew worked either at galleries or at bookstores or for other artists,
And what about teaching?
And teaching happened for me later. Like I had
Later.
to have a little bit of a name to get hired.
I think a few of you mentioned that there was a barrier to entry to teach.
You couldn't just like, hi. You had to like have a little show record, or like somebody recommend you, or somebody volunteer you, or it was.
I find it interesting because now that's sort of one of the de facto careers that artists have is also as a professor or a teacher of art.
Yeah, but tenure is gone, and everybody now is an adjunct, and they like go hopping around like and piecemealing these adjunct jobs together, and like, it's like, you know, it's, friends of mine go up to Albany, it's, you know, it's really rough. And they're not tenured, and they don't get, you know, all kinds of benefits that one would hope that after a certain age, an amount of teaching that you would get. It's really, they have it all over you, because the tenured, when artists make it, they don't want to teach, and the people that haven't quite made this name for themselves are adjunct, and so it's this weird, like, thing that you're stuck in.
Well, I think we could talk about the nuances of predatory capitalism in the university system. That's a whole other conversation. You wanted to add something about teaching.
I know. In the beginning, in the 70s, when women started showing, there were these jobs at Chicago, at the Art Institute of Chicago, in California, where else? Bard, where they were passed around. You know, it was like a 6-month gig, and you got to be a professor for the first time. And I remember when I got the job after Jennifer, I think first Elizabeth had it, then Jennifer, then me, at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1972, this was. And I think this was the first time I had appeared in academia, and I was introduced by the chair of the art department, who had hired me as, well, we couldn't get a star, so we got, this was in front of an audience. We couldn't get a star, so we got Jenny Snider. Well, thank you very much.
Well, I think you're a star for what it's worth, so.
No, but I'm saying that we were, by contrast, we were very privileged, because this was a smaller community, and we were friends, and we passed things around. We passed collectors around. There was a guy who traded refrigerators for art, and we all got refrigerators.
And mink coats. Remember the mink coat phrase?
I didn't get it.
Okay, I don't know where this conversation is going. You got a mink coat for a
I never did.
That was Dior.
I never wanted a mink coat.
I thought that was the Dior.
Okay, folks, well, there you hear it.
Yeah, Jennifer and Ellen got them in coats.
All right, we're going to have to have a conversation with them later.
But about teaching, I do want to say one longer thing about teaching. As an alternative to earning a living by selling your work. I was fortunate that after about 20 years of adjuncting, that I got a full-time tenure-track position at the City University, and I now am living and insured for my medical care because of my pension and my health insurance. We have a terrific, progressive union, and wait, that's not what I was going to talk about teaching. And I spent 40, 50 years teaching in college. I was lucky to have this job, or these jobs. And it was only when I retired that I realized how important my teaching had been to my work and not just to my students, that my work had grown exponentially because I couldn't draw the figure until I had to teach the figure. I didn't know the, perspective until the chair of my department taught me how to teach perspective. And I used the libraries at every school I taught at. And everything I learned teaching my students is in my work now. And I would not be the artist I am today if I hadn't had that. And I also couldn't have survived in this, day to day. I have my Social Security, I have my pension, and my health insurance.
I think that's an incredible sentiment that I'm sure many of us who have been educators or in that system can attest to and share, that our relationship with our students is often symbiotic, though we may not realize it at the time, and it works its way into everything we do. So it really is less of a hierarchical relationship as much as it is a lateral one. I want to move on to the kind of moment that we're in and looking back. We're in a particular moment now of what I would consider to be revisionist art history. And not revisionist in sort of the negative or pejorative way, but in actually the best way. Because now we are coming into a space, not where I would like it to be, but I guess progress is small steps, of inclusivity and visibility. We are taking a more pluralistic approach to the way we think about histories, and particularly art histories, and who has a voice and who's seen. And we're no longer sort of acquiescing to this kind of hegemonic, monolithic, white male narrative. And we've seen this particularly in the past 10 or so years with a handful of shows that, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the full curators of every show. Just know you are recognized in my heart and mind. We Wanted a Revolution, Black Radical Women, 1965 to 85. Radical Women, Latin American Art, from 1960 to 85. And most recently, Just Above Midtown, which just opened 2 days ago at MoMA, which, Cynthia, you are actually part of. And I'm curious, this is sort of a feelings question, but I'm curious, these shows are coming decades, in some cases, nearly half a century after this work was being made, and I wonder how it feels. Is it bittersweet? Is it welcoming? Is it all of the above? You are all important parts of history, unfortunately history that was not necessarily recognized in the time that it was being made.
I'm going to say that, I don't consider it to be bittersweet at all, because I was never going to not paint, and my hiatus in exhibitions was due to my job as a gallery director, but I kept working, and it's actually strangely interesting that people are interested in this work that I've been dragging around for 40 years. And so recently I just gave myself over to it full time, and just somebody had given me a studio for free and for the summer, and so I was in there and I was working away, and I just was like, this is it, and a few months later, all these things started to happen. So, but they didn't happen all by themselves. Other people, like my friend, nobody does, anything alone. There's always people out there who are helping you in some way, whether you know it or not. So, but I don't consider it bittersweet. And I'm just grateful that I'm alive to see it. You know, because I know some people who are not, and then their work is, you know, out there, galleries are doing very well with it, and they're dead. So, you know, I'm happy.
Anyone else want to chime in? Share some thoughts?
I agree with Cynthia. First of all, like, we've all been able to make art, and that alone is like, you know, like, that's amazing. That's fantastic. But I also think that people that get acknowledged after they're dead, you know, it's just material stuff. You know, they lived a life making art, and all the I mean, it's nice to sell your work and all of that, but that's just the extra stuff. I think it's, you know, I think we're all doing fine.
I went to see the Robert Colescott show today, and I knew his name, but I had never, I'm 78 years old, I had never seen one of his paintings in real life. A few years ago, I went to the Annie Albers show at Augustine Luring, and it was gorgeous. And there were students walking about. This is addressing your question about revisionism. I went to Yale in the 60s and studied the color course from one of Joseph Albers' students. And all I could think of when I saw Annie Albers' show was, wouldn't it have been wonderful if Annie had been the chair of the art department at Yale University? If we had learned to value the work of other cultures, if we had learned that there were more than one tradition, if we had learned everything that she learned in her travels. And when I saw the Colescott show today, I was just blown away and angered that I had never seen those paintings in the 70s, because I believe I would have become a much better painter much sooner if I had seen them then. I fortunately saw Philip Guston's paintings in that period. But why didn't I see those Colescott paintings?
I knew Robert Colescott, you know, not like well, but when he'd come to New York, we'd always have dinner. He was really a friend of my husband's more than mine. They used to hang out, and he had these teaching jobs that kept him afloat. That's how he did it.
Why didn't Bob show him at the Museum of Modern Art?
Well, that's a question for
Can
a different
I tell
day.
you something? Robert got hit over the head every day at the Museum of Modern Art. It's like, you know, we bought a Robert Colescott, so that's like what we did.
Dorothea, go ahead.
You know, something I would like to address, and maybe you didn't experience it, I don't know, but what I experienced, and still do, was incredible isolation. Now, the guys all get together. Often I'd go to the Modern or the Met, and the guys my friends, would all be there together. But they never would they don't really, even today, recognize women artists on an equal level. There's no equality.
We continue to be women artists,
That's
not
what I mean.
artists.
That's what I mean. And I just find the whole, I mean, you know, from coming to New York on, the isolation of being a woman and working alone without any camaraderie or dialogue very much. There used to be at Max's Kansas City, but that didn't last very long. And, you know, there's no, you're just not part of a group. And that's not human.
I'm glad she said that because it takes us back to this feminist issue.
Are you going to answer the question that I was going to ask next?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Go for it.
But what I wanted to say is that there was an on-the-ground really outcome of the feminist movement, right, among artists. Like she was saying, you know, women like, you know, could talk about their work and they would get together. However, on top of that, then you have the development of groups like Where We At Black Women Artists, right, in the 70s. When I was in college, I had a new friend, who was older than me, Irene Wheeler, who was a potter or a ceramic sculptor. And we started a group. We just called ourselves 10 Women. And we would meet at each other's place like twice a month and critique our new work and talk about it and, you know, help each other so that we had this, not just camaraderie, but this real, you know, support mechanism.
Yeah,
So
this is
you
really
weren't
great.
isolated. And that went on for a number of years. And even recently, I found that we had recorded some of the meetings. And I have the tapes. Why they gave them to me, I don't know. But I have the tapes. And it was quite a surprise because I completely forgot about it. But yeah, so the outcomes had real of the philosophy of feminism had everyday, you know, impact.
I just want to add one quick thing that's sort of off topic, but I just think it needs to be acknowledged that women artists who have children, like just put a gun to your head. It's like, I mean, it's really tough. It's
beyond belief. I mean, for many years, I slept 3 hours a night. I mean, for like 20 years, because I had a child. And I was the sole support of that child. So, you know, I worked all days at jobs. I cleaned the house. I did all the cooking, all the shopping. I lived on Chambers Street, so there's no food around there. I had to remember to get it, you know, when I was working at Bob's in that area. And, you know, it's just hell. It was just hell. And to get back to your initial question about why do you paint, I had to paint. I mean, it was like having to breathe, you know. So I did it, you know, and I never thought I could have a show ever. You know, and I wasn't. I was not recognized by other men as an artist, and I'd already begun to show. What they wanted to do was get in my pants. No, true. You know, but in terms of being an artist, then when I began to get publicity, they were pissed as hell and they hated me and they were mean to me.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, some things don't change, let's put it that way. Par for the course. So we have, Philip, how are we on time? Where'd you go? We have a wee bit more time. 5 minutes?
There he is.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a question. I'll just ask it, whatever. So, do you want a question about the market, or do you want a question about intersectional feminism?
About what?
Intersectional feminism, contemporary feminism.
You have to explain.
Okay, actually,
The market is interesting. The way it affects women.
okay, we'll go with the market then. Well, I guess.
Could you ask about the future?
Yes, I can absolutely ask about the future. Okay, fine, I'll ask about the future. See, everyone, just to give you some context, they saw the questions ahead of time, so this is their show. I'm just here asking the questions. So since we don't have that much time, I'll tell you the question I was going to ask, and then you can maybe provide some insight into the future. So one of the critiques, and I think this doesn't necessarily apply so much to artists, because I suspect, being familiar with all of your work, that you may not necessarily fall into this category, but one of the things historically that we talk about when we think about feminism and second wave feminism is the rift that happened amongst feminism, and the later feminist movement critiques of that particular era being, the rifts being sort of anti-pornography versus free sex, as well as the other critique that feminism at that time was really Western and Eurocentric, so not necessarily inclusive or diverse in the way that it could have been. And again, this is sort of a retrospective analysis of that era. And I don't know if you agree with it or not. That was going to be the question, whether you agree with it or not, but we won't get into that unless someone really wants to know about it. But thinking about that critique, thinking about where we are today, where we have come, whether or not we have actually progressed at all as in the feminist movement, in society, if we're just sort of on the hamster wheel of different types of oppressions. With all of that really pleasant fodder in your mind, what are you, A, working on coming forward, and B, what is some advice that you can impart from your experiences as a painter to young women, femme, and non-binary painters today? I feel like you have so much to say right now, so go ahead.
Well, first, just sidebar, I don't agree that we were West Eurocentric. And I would point out my friend Elizabeth Weatherford in the audience, who was one of the founding persons on the Heresies Collective, who is an anthropologist. And we did our best, considering the limits of time, space, and energy and money, to make our world as inclusive as it could be, given, as we aforementioned mentioned, the state, the limits that we were living in. History, we didn't make our context. We had to sit in it and work through it. But if you, I would say to anyone who is an artist today, and I know this is true of everybody sitting here, they don't need me to tell them, you just keep working and you make sure that the Republicans do not win in November. That is more important than anything else that we do in our studio.
I disagree.
I'm going to say this is a both and moment.
I think that art is magic and it overcomes politics, and history proves that. I think it's important to make art.
I didn't say it wasn't important to make art.
No, but you're saying politics are more important, and I don't believe that.
That's not what I said.
Then I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
I think we can agree amongst ourselves that this is a both and opportunity. It's not a binary, we have to decide one or the other. making art is as important and can exist in the same space as also fighting the bullshit, which I absolutely agree with you on.
The personal is political, and sisterhood is still powerful.
Agreed. Thank you.
I just want to say about first wave feminism versus second wave feminism is that, we were in the weeds and the things that we were thinking of were, seemed very right at the time. And everything that we put forth seemed like really advanced thinking of equality and all of that stuff. And now, like, my daughter comes, I have like these Indian moccasins, and my daughter was like, "You can't wear those." What are you doing wearing those? It's like so many things, but we've evolved. And, especially if you live around, for us, if we live near young people and are constantly being told how, wrong we are, it's really great in a way, because you go, oh, yeah, I see it now. You're right, but initially, it's the first wave feminists looked at the second wave feminists and thought, oh my God. Now I realize, sex workers, all of this stuff, it's different than what I thought when I was young.
It's part of a social evolution, collective evolution, absolutely. And I also do think that we often do not give grace or nuance to the conversations around the way we frame histories.
Yeah.
Oh, and also, what is your advice to impart onto the current and future painters?
It's such a different world now. It's shocking. First of all, like Dorothea said, we were in a very small art world. There were tops 200 people, and it was,
but
it was
I think there may have been a few more.
It was like this tiny art world. It was 420 and 3 other galleries, and
we all knew each other.
And we all knew each other, and it was, and we'd all live in these lofts that were I paid $250.
Okay,
for
we're not going to talk
2,500
about New York rent right now.
2,500 square foot loft, and it was and I
all right,
always needed a
talk's
roommate.
over. We're not talking about what rent costs in New York in the 1970s.
It was crazy. It was, but it was people that Soho was empty. It was completely empty. It was,
But you're still making now. You're still an active artist. So, and you have seen the art world change. So I think from that perspective, if you'd like to sort of share something, you are absolutely welcome
It
to.
seems so much more about money. When we were younger, it was, nobody expected to make any money. It was just, that was not part of the picture. It was.
Well, women still don't make any money for the most part.
It's true.
And I want to mention that.
Yeah.
If you look at the auction markets, women's work, well-known women's work, like Elizabeth, well, she was having her retrospective at the Modern, and a very large painting of hers, 12 by 15 feet, came up at auction. And she was having her retrospective. She was also dying. It sold for $40,000. If that had been a guy's painting, Fortunately, a very good person bought it and gave it to the Whitney. So it's part of, or the Modern, I can't remember which, but that's, that's the woman's market and the auction houses dictate the financial market of women, and women in auction houses are completely underpriced, always.
Well, I think also you and I can have a separate conversation about the secondary market and predatory capitalism. Stay tuned for that one. Would you like to continue and share some pearls of wisdom for current and future painters?
As everybody here has said, the only thing I know to do is work and work like hell and don't pay attention to anybody else. Just work.
Thank you.
And good art will come out. It will out. You don't have to go to dinner parties. You don't have to connect. You don't have to do anything. You just have to do the work and stay in New York.
and stay in New York, even though it costs more than $200 in rent now. Cynthia, you have the last word.
Well, my last word is to give a little nuance to the discussion about feminism. And that is that in some ways it depended on where you lived as an artist. There are many who lived downtown around what is now Soho. There were some artists of color who also lived down there. But there are a lot of artists who lived uptown in Harlem who were very good artists, and some of them, you know their names today. So, and what I understood or found out as I was writing an essay for someone else's exhibition about Black abstraction in the 70s and 80s, that somebody like Norman Lewis, whose work is really well known now and was part of that studio or Club 35, but he wasn't wanted there, and he finally had to leave because he couldn't even speak in the group at the dinner without having someone else ask the question or say what he was going to say. I mean, that's how biased a lot of people were. Some weren't, some were your friends. I mean, de Kooning was a great friend to Joe Overstreet, right? But there are plenty who came from all over the country and brought their biases with them, right? So in that way, that's one aspect. And we do know that, and it is true, that the feminist movement was particularly Eurocentric. It was particularly middle and upper middle class. And while those women and poor white women and Black women should have coalesced and worked around the same goals, there were fractures among them. And so that's why you then had somewhere in the 80s, Black women splintering off into their own feminist concerns, which were in some ways double, the biases they faced, being women and Black, right? So there were issues, and I just have to acknowledge that.
I'd like to say something about, the Black community in the art world. There were, when I was young, Black artists, and I knew them all. Bob Thompson, Emilio Cruz. I'm just, I'm not remember, but there were a lot of people around.
I know, I didn't say there weren't any.
No, I know you did,
Yeah.
but I just want to add that to make it clear that it wasn't all white males. It was a little different.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. There were others.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of nuance in that discussion, which is why it was sort of unfair to leave it for the end. Cynthia, did you want to impart any advice as well? I was asking Cynthia if she wanted to impart some advice on
Well, it's the
painters.
same as everyone else said, and that everyone knows. In order to be whatever success is, you have to work hard, and you have to stay with it. Can't give up. Can't give up, and never listen to anyone who says no to you.
Amen. That is, I think, a great way to end.